Yes, there's Dorset, that goes in there, and the Western Isles in the right place, and there's a cup of tea. Hello there. I'm just doing a little puzzle here, in lockdown, it always helps, and putting together a bit of Britain there, and making a nice cup of tea. Everyone thinks they know the story of Britain, but beginnings are always tricky, I find. Hang on one second, where's the spoon? I'm going to actually tell you a story called Brutus, Land Ahoy, which is one that I heard a very long time ago. It's supposed to be the story of how Britain first came to be, to exist in the first place. Now, I'm old enough to remember the day when Doggerland flooded and the sea came crashing in around the white cliffs of Dover and created Britain. But even I don't know everything. There's this whole story about the giant queen, Albania. Is it Albania? Sorry, I haven't had enough of this tea yet. But that is how it came to be known as Albion. But how did it come to be known as Britain? That's what this story is about. But the thing is, any country which can confidently claim to know how it came to be in the first place must be a very young country indeed. I mean, the youthful states of North America, for instance, or the positively newborn country of Australia, where natives have lived for thousands of years before the invaders arrived. You can be sure that the origin stories of most nations, nevertheless, always begin with invasion and murder and theft. That's mainly how countries are made. Dear old Britain here. Britain's been around and filled with proud British people of all kinds for a very generous amount of centuries, so it's impossible for us to say absolutely for sure how such a land, call it the United Kingdom, Britain, Albion, or whatever you like, it's impossible to say how it really first came to be. But there is, however, the whoppingly ancient tale of Brutus, Prince Brutus, the great Trojan prince who gave Britain its very name. Or so they say. Perhaps you've never heard of the Trojan War. It was very fashionable once upon a time. Many hundreds upon even more hundreds of eons ago, ages ago, somewhere out towards the hot, dusty lands of Turkey, war broke out between two early civilizations of Troy. The two early human civilizations of Troy and Greece. Reportedly, the whole thing was due to a naughty Trojan prince called Paris, who stole away with Helen, the rather attractive wife of the Grecian king. But ever after, it was said that Helen's beauty was somehow enough to launch 1,000 ships, as soldiers amassed from all over the civilized tribes, to settle this silly dispute of Troy once and for all. Many tales are told of the Trojan War and its aftermath. One Greek general known as Odysseus, who's the clever dick who thought up the Trojan horse idea, you have heard of that one. Odysseus had lots of unlikely adventures on his sails away from victory at Troy, but while Odysseus headed one way for his own mad journey, there was another Trojan prince called Aeneas, who was sailing off in the opposite direction. "Good luck, Aeneas," Odysseus whooped as his ship's sails caught the wind eastwards. "Have fun, Odysseus," Aeneas waved back. "See you at the next World War, perhaps." Anyway, this is backstory stuff. Aeneas' troops of friends, they all wandered throughout Europe for years, and his children had their own children. Prince Brutus happens to be the grandson of Aeneas, who interests us in this story. Now, Brutus was a wiry little warrior, very sharp and a born leader of people. Great wizards predicted exciting things for little Brutus when he was still potty training. The young lad did get into a spot of bother one day by accidentally shooting his father with an arrow during one truly awful beach holiday in Italy. However, Brutus's natural leadership was to come in very handy, because at that point he was exiled, with his own gang of brave young Trojans to follow him. "But where am I supposed to go?" young Brutus whined. "All my stuff is here." "Never you mind, my lad," said the coast guard. "Hooligans like you with your bow and arrows twang all the time, you're not wanted on the continent. Here's a boat, go on, take that boat. You find a home just like your granddad did." "Fine then, I will," answered back Brutus. "Come on, gang." Anyway, Brutus's band of friends sailed up around Spain and found themselves in Gaul, the place that people now call France, where a bit more trouble was caused again, this time by Brutus's best mate, Corin. He'll do for Corin, won't he? Hello, Corin. Hello. No, that's not your voice. Hello. Anyway, Corin, Brutus's best mate, Corin. He was another Trojan prince, but he was gigantic, where Brutus was compact and nippy. The two of them walking together always were quite a spectacle. Corin stood the height of any self-respecting tree, and impossibly bulging muscles rippled under the mass of his huge arms and belly. Corin's favourite thing was food. It was just like Corin to eat all of the boars in the King of Aquitaine's forest and spark a war which spilled gallons and gallons of blood before the Gauls begged Corin to just leave us alone and go away. "But we only just got here," Brutus complained. "Well, we already live here. Find another home," the Gaulish king stormed back. "Here, have another boat. Have anything, but get off my land." The daughter of this king of Gaul was called Eggnog, I-G-N-O-G-E. And yes, it really was pronounced just like eggnog that we have at Christmas. I've decided. That's how it was pronounced. Eggnog had taken a fancy to brave young Brutus and announced that she was going wherever he was. And so, without a glance back, Brutus, his young wife Eggnog, and all his Trojan friends, Prince Corin and otherwise, they all set sail away from the continent of Europe for the last time to see what was out there. Unfortunately, and this tended to happen quite a lot in the old days, what was out there was wind and rain and horrifying storms which bashed and buffeted Brutus's boat up, down, under and over 1,000 times, the whole crew churning their guts up into the remorseless waves day after day, and only maggoty biscuits to eat. Nobody on board had ever thought to ask if anyone actually knew how to sail a ship, especially up in the choppy waters surrounding the north of Europe. It was getting very, very tricky indeed, but they sailed on and on and on and on and on. The life on the ocean wave, it turned out, stank. It was with great relief that this half-wreck of a ship all but smashed itself into pieces on a scraggy little island somewhere out northwestish. Annoyingly, there was nothing on this chalky outcrop but an old, half-ruined temple devoted to the Greek goddess Artemis. You know the one. She liked hunting and the moon and things like that, and the Romans came along and decided to call her Diana for no apparent reason, but her name was Artemis. "Oh dear, everyone, I'm afraid we're not quite as saved as we thought we were," admitted Brutus. "Artemis!" gasped Eggnog. "The goddess of the moon and the hunting!" Artemis was absolutely her favourite god of the many gods people had to choose from back then. "Not so much as a nesting gannet to roast for supper, or the odd strange root to suck on," grumped Corin, and Eggnog hugged one of his enormous arms. The exhausted crew fell on their knees and prayed to Artemis for a sign, any sign. And oddly, because this sort of thing still happened in those days, she gave them one. A clear, crystal voice broke out from the temple and sang on the winds.
Brutus, there lies beyond the Gallic bounds an island which the western sea surrounds. By giants once possessed, now few remain to bar thy entrance or obstruct thy reign. To reach that happy shore thy sails employ, their fate decrees to raise a second Troy, and found an empire in thy royal line, which time shall ne'er destroy, nor bounds confine.
Did that lady just say I was going to be king of somewhere? Asked Brutus. Something like that, grumped Corin. But anyway, let's get what's left of the ship lashed together and set off north. I'm starving. I don't even mind rowing if it gets me something for my supper. Back on the ship, everyone, Brutus called, and off they all went again. However, at Eggnog's suggestion, they took with them a spare stone. A stone from around that ancient temple to remind them of Artemis's promise to them all. With Corin whirling his mighty oars through the grey waves, the rest of their journey was much swifter, and before they knew it, "Land ahoy!" cried Brutus with a big, enormous, shining grin. White cliffs stretched up for what seemed like miles, and the sun shone above on the greenest fields that any of them had ever seen. There, peeping over from the top of the cliffs, they saw sheep and deer and boar and huge cows called aurochs, massive things, and they all ran away at the sight of this ship to the shelter of the trees, which were weighed down with deep, shining fruit of all kinds. It's making me hungry just think about it. Eggnog's smile was bedazzling. "This land is a vision of home I have never imagined before. A fruity place of mysteries and comforts. Brutus, are we home at last?" Brutus was the first to set his foot ashore. "Here I stand, and here I rest, and this town shall be called Totnes." Here it is, somewhere round about there, Totnes, he announced, and everyone whooped and cheered and poured down onto the dry land and set about finding gorgeous things to eat, building fires, erecting shelters, and thanking the goddess Artemis for their safe arrival in this land, the newly named Brutus land, or perhaps Britain. Britain? Safe? Has Britain ever really been safe? Well, the giants who romped around this green and pleasant land took issue with both of those words. That place, you see, was Albion, a playground for the giant children of an even more ancient Greek princess called Albina. That's what I meant to say at the start of the tale. Albina, or Albina, it's up to you. Albina and her sisters had given birth to this whole community of giants that roamed all around this funny little northern island. And these cheeky little strangers who just washed up on the island were not at all welcome. Prince Brutus awoke the next morning to smouldering campfires and, as he looked up, wiping the sleep from his eyes, there were a whole host of slavering, mountain-sized giants bearing down on them all, roaring righteous bloodlust. "Humans, humans, humans! Out, out, out!" they bellowed, and the ground shook as they drew near. Oh, the battles were many and frankly upsetting. I mean, you wouldn't want to hear all about upsetting things like battles between dumb giants and sword-wielding humans, would you? All the biffing and the splatting and the nibbling of ears and the squirtings of blood all over the place and so on, the guts on the floor. Oh dear, it was all very, very messy indeed. We don't need to go into it that much. It's enough to say that Brutus and his army had Corin on their side, and soon there was only one giant left of this attacking party, standing there trying to get them back off the island. Now this one's name was Gogmagog. Not Zebedee, Gogmagog. Remember that. This is the giant Gogmagog, this is the giant Corin. And Gogmagog was the biggest of all the huge giants of Albion. As big as two giants in one. "Come here then, big fella," Corin laughed. "Then it's time for breakfast." Now, Corin and Gogmagog wrestled and struggled all along the south coast, all the way down here. Something like that. They wouldn't stop fighting for day after day. All along the south coast they went, past Totnes, down towards the very curly end of the country. Sometimes Corin had the upper hand with both fists up Gog Magog's nostrils in a special killer move he developed called the Bogey Basher. And sometimes Gog Magog forced himself back into power position, swinging Corin around like a particularly beefy rag doll. Eventually, as the wrestlers arrived atop a monstrously tall cliff in an area now known as Plymouth Hoe, there, a particularly timely poke in the eye from Prince Corin finally caused the mighty Gog Magog over the side, and he crashed all the way down with such a big splat and a mess all over the beach. The locals ended up putting 2 chalk outlines around what was left of this giant, and they called the 2 of them Gog and Magog. It's never been decided since whether there were 2 giants or 1, but that's what actually happened. I remember seeing it in the news at the time. But if you go down to Plymouth Hoe now, you will be able to see the actual spot where Gog Magog finally bought it. Anyway, Brutus was so glad that his best friend was still alive after all that he gave him the whole wodge of land that he stood on, and it became known as Cornwall. You see? Cornwall. Not sure where the wall comes in. We'll look into that later. Anyway, with Cornwall finally here in place. No, I'll do that in a minute. Now we have Devon, and we have Cornwall, and we have the country of Britain. Brutus and Eggnog themselves rode out east to try and find the perfect spot to call home and to put that one stone that they found at the temple of Artemis. They must find a home. They searched all over for the home to found an empire in our royal line, Eggnog reminded Brutus. Well, yes, dearest, he replied, but just somewhere cosy and relatively safe from giants would be good. Eventually, they both agreed on an unspoiled hillside on the banks of the River Thames, and they built their home there, calling it New Troy. So it really was a home from home, and the cosy settlement of Troia Nova became known to the Romans as Trinovantum, and only many eons later via Londinium by its other name, London. Not a place you really want to go right now. But what you can go and you see there is this stone. Somewhere in the city of London, the Brutus stone is there to be seen quite quietly. It's been sitting there for thousands and thousands of years. Similarly, you can go down to Totnes and see the actual outline of Brutus's foot where he first set foot on the island that was to have his name. In the city of London, Brutus and Eggnog built a new temple to Artemis, and they ruled happily together for 25 years. And they had 3 sons, Lacrinus, Albanactus, and Camber, to rule in the east and the north and the west when time was done. But that old knackered royal couple never wandered far from their new home ever again, because to Brutus, Britain was home. The end. And there we go, we just have to put that the last bit in there, and that's time for a cup of tea, I think. Bye-bye.